The call came at 3017 a.m., that peculiar hour when the night feels eternal and the mind most vulnerable to dark possibilities. Morgan Reeves had been awake anyway, poring over case files from an insurance fraud investigation that paid the bills but did little to challenge his intellect. The ringtone sliced through the silence of his apartment above the old bookstore in Back Bay. "Reeves," he answered, his voice carrying no trace of the hour. "Mr. Reeves. This is Chancellor Robert Hargrove from Ivy Heights University." The voice on the other end sounded strained, the carefully measured tones of someone accustomed to authority but now finding himself out of his depth. "We have a situation that requires discretion and expertise. Your name was recommended to us by Detective Sanchez from Boston PD." Reeves set down his fountain pen, giving the call his full attention. Rosa Sanchez rarely made referrals, and never for trivial matters. "I'm listening. One of our faculty members has gone missing under unusual circumstances. Dr. Amelia Winters, Chair of Neuropsychology. The police have been helpful, but given the sensitive nature of Dr. Winters' research and the university's reputation, we'd prefer additional expertise that operates outside official channels." "What makes her disappearance unusual, Chancellor?" Reeves asked, already reaching for his leather notebook. A hesitation on the line. "Perhaps it would be better if you saw for yourself. Could you come to campus this morning? I can have security meet you at the Cognitive Sciences building at 7 a.m. "I'll be there," Reeves confirmed, ending the call. He moved to the window, looking out at Boston's sleeping streets. Ivy Heights University occupied a sprawling campus alongside the Charles River. Its Gothic architecture and modern research facilities representing the intersection of tradition and cutting-edge science. It was also notoriously protective of its reputation and research funding. For them to seek out a private investigator, especially one with Reeves' particular reputation for handling unusual cases, suggested something far beyond a simple missing person scenario. The Cognitive Sciences building stood apart from the rest of the campus, its sleek modern design contrasting with the century-old structures surrounding it. As promised, a security officer was waiting when Reeves arrived at precisely 7 a.m. "Mr. Reeves. I'm Bill Kaplan, head of campus security. The Chancellor asked me to escort you to Dr. Winters' lab." Kaplan was a former police officer. Reeves could tell from his stance and the evaluating look he gave the detective. "He'll meet us there." The building was eerily quiet as they walked through polished corridors. Most staff and students have been told the floor is closed for maintenance, Kaplan explained. Only essential personnel have been allowed in since. He trailed off as they reached a set of double doors marked Advanced Cognitive Research Laboratory, authorized personnel only. Chancellor Hargrove was waiting inside, a tall man with silver hair and the practiced smile of someone who spent most of his time soliciting donations from wealthy alumni. The smile didn't reach his eyes this morning. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for coming on such short notice." He extended his hand. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Reeves shook the offered hand briefly, his stormy grey eyes already scanning the laboratory. It was an impressive space, multiple workstations, with advanced computing equipment, brain imaging machinery, and a separate room visible through a glass partition that appeared to be some kind of specialized testing chamber. "Tell me about Dr. Winters and her disappearance," Reeves said, moving deeper into the lab. "Amelia Winters has been with us for 7 years. Brilliant researcher, somewhat intense in her dedication. She's been leading a project on neural plasticity and consciousness states." Hargrove hesitated. 3 days ago, she was working late. Security footage shows her entering the lab at AC 4:02 p.m. She never left, at least not through any monitored exit. "And this is where it gets unusual," Kaplan added, leading Reeves toward the back of the laboratory. Her research assistant found this the next morning. On the wall, written in what appeared to be marker, were the words, "I've lost memsielfian, THEECHO-CHMBRs." Beneath the writing was a small device resembling a modified headset with additional components attached. Reeves approached but didn't touch it. Her equipment was undisturbed. Hargrove continued. No signs of struggle or forced entry. The security system recorded no exits, and all her personal items, phone, bag, coat, were still here. It's as if she simply vanished. Reeves studied the message. "What are echo chambers in this context?" An uncomfortable glance passed between Hargrove and Kaplan. "That's part of what makes this sensitive," the Chancellor said. "Degas. Winters' recent research involves what she termed neural echo chambers, specialized acoustic environments that allegedly can alter brain-wave patterns and perception. Her work was controversial among her colleagues." "Controversial how?" Reeves asked, his attention now on a desk that presumably belonged to Winters. "She claimed to have developed technology that could induce specific brain states, allowing subjects to perceive what she called alternate perceptual frameworks, essentially experiencing reality differently." Hargrove's tone suggested skepticism. Many in the field considered her theories fringe science at best. Reeves picked up a framed photograph showing a woman in her mid-40s with intense eyes and dark hair, streaked with premature silver. She stood beside complex audio equipment, a look of fierce concentration on her face. Dr. Winters, I presume, who had access to her lab? Only her research team, 3 graduate assistants and 1 postdoc, and senior faculty with proper clearance. Of course. Hargrove straightened his tie. All have been interviewed by campus security. "I'll need to speak with them myself," Reeves said, not looking up as he began examining papers on the desk. "And I'll need access to Dr. Winters' research files, emails, and any surveillance footage from the building. Some of her research is proprietary." Hargrove began. "Everything," Reeves interrupted, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. "If you want me to find her, I need complete access. Otherwise, I suggest you rely solely on the police investigation." After a moment's hesitation, Hargrove nodded. "Very well. Mr. Kaplan will provide whatever you need, but I must emphasize the need for absolute discretion. The university's reputation is not my concern," Reeves finished for him. "Finding Dr. Winters is. Now, I'd like to examine the lab alone." Once Hargrove and Kaplan had reluctantly withdrawn, Reeves began a methodical inspection of the space. The laboratory told the story of a mind consumed by its work notes, scribbled on every available surface, research papers stacked in organized chaos. multiple experiments seemingly running simultaneously. The separate testing chamber drew his attention. Unlike the main lab's clinical brightness, this room was designed for acoustic isolation, its walls covered with specialized sound-absorbing materials. In the center stood a chair surrounded by an array of speakers and what appeared to be custom-built audio equipment. On a control panel outside the chamber, a notebook lay open. Reeves examined the elegant, compressed handwriting. Day 4070 frequency modulation at 17.3 Hz producing consistent results. Subjects report perception shifts after 12-15 minutes of exposure. Brain imaging shows unusual activity in temporal lobes and hippocampus. The doorway is opening wider. I can almost see through. The last line was underlined 3 times. As Reeves continued his examination, the laboratory began to yield its secrets. Winters had been pursuing something beyond conventional research, something that had increasingly isolated her from colleagues. Notes referred to perceptual bleeding and cross-dimensional resonance, terminology that belonged more in theoretical physics than neuroscience. Most intriguing was a locked drawer in her desk, which Reeves opened with the set of pics he carried as a habit from his FBI days. Inside was a personal journal, different from her research notes. The most recent entry, dated 3 days ago, read, "The university is watching me more closely now. Henderson from Applied Physics asked too many questions today. Someone has been talking. It doesn't matter. I'm too close to stop. Tonight I'll attempt full immersion with the new frequency mapping. If I'm right about the resonance patterns, the echo chamber will allow complete perceptual shifting. I need to know if what I've been glimpsing is real. God help me if it is." Reeves photographed the journal entries with his camera before carefully replacing everything as he'd found it. His final stop was the mysterious headset beneath the written message. It was custom-built, incorporating elements of conventional audio equipment with modifications he didn't recognize. A small digital display on its side showed a frequency, 17.3 Hz. The same frequency mentioned in Dr. Winters' notes. The first interview was with Michael Chen, Winters' primary research assistant, a graduate student with the anxious look of someone who hadn't slept in days. They sat in a small conference room adjacent to the lab. "I was the one who found the message," Chen said, his fingers nervously tapping on the table. "I came in early to prepare for a scheduled experiment. Everything was exactly as you saw it, no sign of Dr. Winters, just that writing and the prototype." "Tell me about her research," Reeves prompted, his steady gaze noting Chen's every micro-expression. "Officially, we were studying how specific sound frequencies affect brain function and perception." Chen's emphasis on "officially" didn't escape Reeves' notice. But in the last 6 months, Dr. Winters' focus had shifted. How so? She became obsessed with what she called perception boundaries, the idea that our brains filter out entire categories of reality that exist alongside what we normally perceive. Chen lowered his voice despite the empty room. She believed certain acoustic patterns could temporarily disable these filters. And the echo chambers, custom, design acousticulated environments where specific frequency creates slave resonate waves that supposedly resonate with neural pathways. Chan scientific terminology couldn't disguise his unease. Dr. Winters started testing them on herself about 2 months ago. She said the University Ethics Committee was moving too slowly to approve human trials. Reeves made a note. What did she experience during these self-tests? She wouldn't give details, at least not to me. Just said she was seeing the edges of something significant. Chen hesitated, but she changed after the sessions, became more secretive, worked at odd hours. Sometimes I'd find notes in handwriting that didn't quite look like hers. Was she experiencing mental health issues? That's what Dr. Henderson from Applied Physics suggested when he filed his complaint. Chen looked down. But Dr. Winters wasn't unstable. She was brilliant, methodical. Whatever she was experiencing, she approached it scientifically. Tell me about Henderson's complaint. Chen shifted uncomfortably. He claimed her research was veering into pseudoscience and could damage the department's reputation. He demanded a review of her methods after overhearing her discussing parallel perceptual frameworks with a subject. When was this complaint filed? 2 weeks ago. The faculty committee was scheduled to review her research tomorrow. Chen's eyes widened slightly. You don't think that's connected to her disappearance, do you? Reeves didn't answer directly. Who else knew about her self-experimentation? Just the core team, me, Lisa Douglas, and Dr. Karen Singh, her postdoc. And Chen trailed off. And, Reeves prompted, there was someone else, not university-affiliated. A man who visited her lab several times in the past month. Military bearing, though he never identified himself that way. Dr. Winters would send us all home when he arrived. Name: Collins. I don't know if that was first or last. I overheard them once. They were arguing about operational applications and ethical boundaries. Chen looked genuinely worried now. Duckett? Winters was furious, told him her research wasn't meant for what he was proposing. Reeves made another note. One more question, Mr. Chen. Do you believe Dr. Winters discovered something real with her echo chambers? Something beyond conventional science. The young researcher was silent for a long moment. I'm a scientist. I need evidence. He took a deep breath. But the last time I saw her, she showed me brain scans from her self-experiments. There were patterns of activity I've never seen in any literature, activation in regions that shouldn't be connected. And she seemed different, like someone who had seen something they couldn't unsee. After interviewing the other team members, a pattern emerged that confirmed Chen's account. Dr. Winters had grown increasingly isolated and secretive, while simultaneously making what she claimed were significant breakthroughs. The mysterious Collins had appeared approximately 6 weeks ago, showing particular interest in the practical applications of her acoustic technology. Most revealing was Reeves' conversation with Dr. Karan Singh, the postdoctoral researcher who had worked most closely with Winters. The echo chambers were just the delivery mechanism. Singh explained, his voice carrying the precise cadence of someone choosing words carefully. The real innovation was her frequency mapping algorithm. It could identify and target specific neural networks, essentially creating a backdoor into how the brain processes sensory information. With what goal? Reeves asked. Tga. Winters believed our conventional perception is highly filtered. that we're surrounded by aspects of reality our brains have evolved to ignore for survival purposes. Singh's scientific demeanor cracked slightly. She called it consensus reality, the narrow band of perception most humans share because our neural architecture is similar. And her technology could bypass this filter. That was the theory. The frequencies would create a sort of neural interference pattern, temporarily disrupting the brain's normal filtration processes. Singh hesitated. In her last experiment before she disappeared, she claimed to have maintained an alternate perceptual state for nearly 20 minutes. What did she perceive in this state? She wouldn't say precisely, just that there were spaces between spaces and resonances of consciousness that existed alongside our reality. Singh looked uncomfortable. Look, Mr. Reeves, I'm a neuroscientist with conventional training. This ventures into territory that sounds more like mysticism than science. But Dr. Winters' data was compelling, even if her interpretations were unorthodox. By late afternoon, Reeves had assembled enough information to begin forming a clearer picture. Dr. Amelia Winters had developed technology that potentially altered human perception in unprecedented ways. Her research had attracted attention from someone with likely military connections. And just before a review that might have shut down her work, she had disappeared after a final self-experiment, leaving behind a cryptic message about being lost in co-chambers. The security footage from the night of her disappearance showed Winters working alone in her lab until nearly midnight. The camera captured her entering the acoustic chamber with her specialized headset. 2 hours later, the footage showed a brief power fluctuation that caused the cameras to reset. When they came back online 30 seconds later, the lab appeared empty. The next morning's footage showed Chen discovering the message and the abandoned headset. What the footage didn't show was anyone else entering or leaving the lab during those critical hours. Unless Winters had found some way out that avoided all security cameras, unlikely given Kaplan's thorough coverage of the building, she had simply vanished from a locked, monitored laboratory. Reeves returned to his apartment as darkness fell, spreading his notes and photographs across his desk. Something about this case resonated with him in unusual ways: the vanishing scientist, the boundaries of perception, the spaces between conventional understanding. It reminded him of certain classified cases from his FBI days, incidents filed away under designations that guaranteed they would never see the light of day. His phone rang at 9:43 p.m. Unknown number. "Reeves," he answered. "Mr. Reeves, my name is Thomas Collins. I understand you've been asking about me." The voice was measured, authoritative, military, as Chen had suggested. "I'm investigating Dr. Winters' disappearance. Your name came up. I know why you were hired. I also know your background, former FBI. Specialization in cases that defied conventional explanation. Your last case before going private involved the Richardson anomaly in 2017. Reeves went very still. The Richardson file had been classified at the highest levels. No university chancellor would have that information. What's your interest in Dr. Winters' research, Mr. Collins? The same as yours, finding her, though perhaps for different reasons. A pause. We should meet. There are aspects of this situation beyond what the university has told you. When and where? Tonight. The boathouse at the edge of campus, overlooking the river. 1 hour. The line went dead. The boathouse was dark when Reeves arrived. The October night bringing an early frost that crystallized on the weathered wood. He approached cautiously, one hand inside his coat, close to the holster beneath his left arm. Years of experience had taught him that mysterious meetings rarely went as planned. A figure emerged from the shadows near the dock. Average height, military posture, nondescript in a way that suggested training in remaining unmemorable. Thomas Collins. You're prompt, Mr. Reeves. A quality I appreciate. Collins gestured toward a bench overlooking the water. Shall we? Reeves remained standing. You know things about me that aren't public record. That suggests resources beyond a university consultant. I represent interests within the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. Unofficially, of course. Collins showed no reaction to Reeves' refusal to sit. Winters' research came to our attention approximately 8 months ago, when she published a paper on neural entrainment through acoustic resonance. Military applications, Reeves stated flatly. Potential applications across multiple domains. Collins corrected. Dr. Winters' work suggested possibilities for treating PTSD, enhancing learning, perhaps even countering certain types of psychological warfare. We provided supplementary funding through a research foundation, and in return, progress reports, demonstration of results, standard procedure. Collins looked out over the dark water. Until 3 months ago, when she reported an unexpected breakthrough, what she termed perceptual breakthrough thresholds. After that, her reports became increasingly challenging to evaluate. She was seeing things you couldn't verify, Reeves suggested. She claimed her technology was allowing access to perceptual frameworks outside conventional reality. Collins' tone remained neutral. The problem wasn't the claim itself. DARPA has investigated stranger concepts. The issue was her growing reluctance to share methodology and results. She didn't trust you. She became convinced her discovery had implications beyond scientific advancement, started talking about moral responsibilities and dangers of unrestricted access. A hint of frustration crept into Collins' voice. 2 weeks ago, she informed us she was suspending all cooperation pending what she called ethical protocols. And now she's missing, Reeves observed. Convenient timing. Collins turned to face him directly. If you're implying we had something to do with her disappearance, you're mistaken. Dr. Winters represents a significant investment. We want her found with her research intact. Why tell me this? Because you're looking in the wrong places. Collins reached into his jacket, causing Reeves to tense, but he merely withdrew a small USB drive. This contains Dr. Winters' complete research files, including data she wasn't sharing with her university colleagues or us. Our analysts have reviewed it, but can't make sense of her most recent work. Perhaps you'll see something we've missed. Reeves took the drive cautiously. Why would you share classified research with a private investigator? Because you have a history with similar cases. Because conventional investigators won't consider explanations outside established parameters. Collins stepped back. And because if what Dr. Winters claimed in her last communication is true. We may be dealing with something far beyond a missing person case. Which was? She believed her echo chambers weren't just altering perception. She claimed they were creating temporary apertures between different states of reality. Colin's face remained impassive. Her final message to us, sent hours before she disappeared, stated she had found evidence of bleed through actual physical transference between perceptual frameworks. She thought she could move between realities, Reeves clarified, or that something from another perceptual framework could move into ours. Collins checked his watch. I've already said more than I should. Review the files. If you find Dr. Winters, or whatever she's discovered, contact me through the number on the drive. As Collins walked away into the darkness, he called back one final comment. And Mr. Reeves, be careful with the prototype. The effects can be disorienting. Back in his apartment, Reeves spent hours reviewing the files Collins had provided. Dr. Winters' research was a labyrinth of brilliance and increasing obsession. Her work had begun conventionally enough, studying how certain sound frequencies affected brain activity. But a chance discovery had sent her down an increasingly unorthodox path. She had identified what she called neural resonance patterns, specific frequency combinations that created unusual activity in the temporal lobes and hippocampus, areas associated with memory and perception. When delivered through her specially designed acoustic environment, the echo chambers, these frequencies induced altered states of consciousness, unlike typical hallucinations or dream states. Her later notes described consensus reality as merely one band on a spectrum of possible perceptions, with her technology enabling temporary access to adjacent bands. Most striking were her descriptions of what she experienced during self-experimentation. The boundaries between spaces become visible, like seeing the seams in what we assume is continuous reality. There are apertures, transitions between states that have always been there, but remain imperceptible under normal conditions. Most remarkable is the sensation of presences, consciousnesses that exist alongside our own, occupying the same physical space, but perceiving through entirely different frameworks. Her final research entries documented a shift from theory to a new, more troubling direction. The resonance isn't just perceptual. There's actual physical interaction possible at the quantum level. Particles can transition between perception states when properly entangled. I've successfully moved small objects between frameworks. The military implications are why Collins keeps pushing, but he doesn't understand what he's asking for. Opening these doorways permanently could destabilize both frameworks. Some boundaries exist for reasons beyond our comprehension. Reeves paused on the last entry, dated the day of her disappearance. I've recalibrated the frequency mapping to create a larger aperture, enough for a human to theoretically transition completely. The risks are significant, but I need to understand what exists on the other side of perception. The echo is growing stronger, responses to my transitions that suggest consciousness or intent from the other framework. I can no longer trust that what I'm perceiving is merely an undiscovered aspect of our reality. Tonight, I'll attempt full immersion. If I'm right, physical transition is possible. If I'm wrong, at least the ethics committee won't have to worry about their review. Dawn was breaking when Reeves finally set aside the files. The picture was clearer now, but no less disturbing. Dr. Winters hadn't suffered a breakdown or fled conventional pursuers. She had deliberately used her technology to attempt something unprecedented, a physical transition into what she believed was an adjacent reality framework. And based on the evidence, she might have succeeded. The prototype headset remained in the lab, still set to the frequency she had used. If Reeves wanted answers beyond theory and speculation, the path was obvious but fraught with its own dangers. To find Dr. Winters, he might need to follow her into the echo chambers of perception. But first, he needed to understand what he was potentially walking into. Lisa Douglas, the youngest member of Winters' research team, met Reeves at a coffee shop off campus, away from university oversight. Unlike Chen's nervous energy or Singh's scientific detachment, Douglas displayed an intense conviction that reminded Reeves of researchers he'd encountered on previous unusual cases. People who had glimpsed something beyond conventional understanding and been transformed by it. Dr. Winters wasn't just my advisor, she trusted me, Douglas said, her voice low despite the bustling cafe around them. I was the control observer for most of her self-experiments. I monitored her vitals and brain activity while she was in the chamber. Did she discuss what she was experiencing during these sessions? Reeves asked. Douglas glanced around before answering. Not officially. Nothing in the research notes. But after the sessions, when it was just us, yes. She leaned forward. Mr. Reeves, what I'm about to tell you would damage my academic credibility if repeated. I'm only sharing it because I believe Dr. Winters is in danger. I understand. Everything stays between us. Dr. Winters believed she had discovered that reality is layered, that what we perceive is just one layer, with others existing simultaneously in the same physical space. Douglas's intensity grew. The echo chambers allowed her to perceive these other layers and eventually to interact with them. Interact how? At first, just awareness, sensing presences, seeing distortions in normal space-time. Then more direct experiences. Douglas lowered her voice further. She claimed to have made contact with entities that exist in these other layers. Not aliens or spirits in any traditional sense, more like parallel evolutions of consciousness operating under different perceptual rules. Reeves kept his expression neutral, though this aligned with cases he'd encountered before. Did she believe these entities were responding to her? More than that. In her last sessions, she became convinced they were trying to open a more permanent connection between layers. Douglas hesitated. She said they were reaching back, attempting to create a stable aperture between perceptual frameworks. Did she see this as threatening? Not exactly. She described it more as intensely curious, like scientists on both sides of a previously impermeable barrier, suddenly able to communicate. Douglas looked down at her untouched coffee, but she was concerned about Collins and his people. She said if DARPA understood the true potential of her discovery, they'd weaponize it immediately. Weaponize perception itself, Reeves mused. Imagine soldiers who could step between layers of reality, becoming essentially invisible, or weapons that could transition between frameworks bypassing conventional defenses. Douglas shuddered slightly. Degas? Winters realized too late who she was really working for. That's why she began withholding data. And her final experiment. The night she disappeared. She didn't tell me she was planning it. But she'd been refining the frequency mapping for weeks, trying to create what she called a stable transition aperture, essentially a doorway that would allow complete physical transition between perceptual frameworks. Douglas met his eyes directly. Mr. Reeves, I think she succeeded. I think she crossed over, leaving the message as, what? A breadcrumb? Or a warning? Douglas reached into her bag and withdrew a small notebook. She gave me this 2 days before she disappeared. Said if anything happened to her, I should keep it safe until someone came looking who would understand. The notebook contained handwritten frequency mappings, mathematical formulations that meant little to Reeves. But the final page held something more significant, a hand-drawn diagram of the headset prototype with modifications noted in precise detail. She improved the design, Douglas explained. Created a version that would allow for more controlled transitions. This is what she would have used that night. But the prototype in the lab doesn't match these specifications, Reeves noted. No. What's in the lab is the previous version, more limited, potentially more dangerous without proper calibration. Douglas tapped the notebook. If you're considering what I think you are, you need this version. The one that might actually allow you to return. Reeves studied her face. You believe she's alive, then? Just elsewhere. I believe Dr. Winters succeeded in what she set out to do. Douglas's conviction was unwavering. Whether that's a triumph or a tragedy depends on what she found on the other side of perception. Modifying the prototype according to Winters' specifications required components not readily available to the public. Fortunately, Reeves maintained contacts from his FBI days who operated in grey areas of technological acquisition. By evening, he had everything needed to transform the headset into what Winters had designed for her final experiment. The university campus was quiet as Reeves made his way back to the Cognitive Sciences building. He had arranged access through Kaplan, claiming a need to review evidence in the lab after hours. The security chief had been reluctant, but eventually agreed, provided Reeves checked in every hour. The laboratory felt different at night, the humming equipment and shadows creating an atmosphere that seemed appropriate for boundary-crossing experiments. Reeves worked methodically, modifying the headset according to the specifications in Winters' notebook, checking each connection twice before proceeding. When the modifications were complete, he placed the device on the control console and stepped back. What he was considering defied conventional logic, attempting to use experimental technology to cross into what might be an entirely different perceptual framework, based on the theories of a scientist who had herself vanished during a similar attempt. And yet, throughout his career, both with the FBI and as a private investigator, Reeves had encountered phenomena that existed at the edges of established understanding. The Richardson anomaly that Collins had mentioned had involved similar theories of reality as a spectrum rather than an absolute. If Dr. Winters had indeed found a way to navigate between these spectrums. Finding her would require following her method. He sent a text to Kaplan, "Working late. All secure." Then he entered the acoustic chamber, carrying the modified headset and Winters' notebook. The chamber's specialized construction created an immediate sense of isolation. The outside world sounds completely muffled. Reeves sat in the chair at the center, surrounded by the array of specialized speakers. Following Winters' notes, he activated the system and placed the headset over his ears. The display showed the specified frequency, 17.3 Hz, modulated according to her final algorithm. As the system powered up, he felt a subtle vibration not just in his ears, but seemingly within his skull, a resonance that bypassed normal auditory pathways. The effect began subtly, a slight blurring at the edges of vision, a sensation of pressure behind the eyes. Reeves remained perfectly still, his breathing measured, mind focused on maintaining awareness, even as his perception began to shift. After approximately 7 minutes, the changes accelerated. The walls of the chamber appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting with impossible flexibility. Colors shifted beyond their normal spectrums, revealing gradations that had no names in conventional language. Most disconcerting was the growing sense that the apparently empty space around him was not empty at all, that presences occupied the same physical location, just slightly out of phase with conventional perception. Reeves checked his watch. The mundane action anchoring him as reality continued to destabilize around him. 12 minutes into the session. According to Winters' notes, the transition threshold typically occurred between 15 and 18 minutes of exposure. As the 15-minute mark approached, the chamber began to change more dramatically. The walls seemed to develop textures that rippled and flowed like liquid, despite remaining solid to the touch. The air itself became visible as patterns of energy that responded to his movements. And the sense of presences strengthened, until Reeves could almost discern shapes, forms that existed alongside him, but remained just beyond clear perception. At 16 minutes, a new phenomenon emerged. What appeared to be faint traces of writing materialized on the wall before him, not the message Winters had left, but something else, something that seemed to be forming even as he watched. The characters were unlike any language he recognized, yet somehow conveyed meaning directly to his consciousness, or the tarsld opans, dupjochirasis. Reeves spoke aloud, his voice sounding strange in the acoustically isolated chamber. "Morgan Reeves. I'm looking for Amelia Winters." The writing shifted, reformed. "Echi sirasadi. Tichi is dangeros. Apiartiori urenstata. I need to find her. Can you help me? Tiransatior aquaris sera. Idibar opposipul framai. Dangiro os for kind." Reeves felt a cold certainty that he was communicating with whatever entities Winters had contacted, consciousnesses that existed in a perceptual framework adjacent to conventional reality. How do I transition? How do I follow her? The writing flowed again. Ar alas cansam s. Alanodu desasol amof budais. THEFRQNCYCRAHEPH. The chamber around him began to change more dramatically. The solid walls seemed to become transparent, revealing what looked like the same room, but subtly different equipment arranged differently. Lighting coming from sources that didn't exist in his reality. Beyond this transitional space, he glimpsed further layers, versions of the chamber, that became increasingly alien in their configuration. Reeves understood that he was seeing the spectrum of reality that Winters had theorized, layer upon layer of perception, each governed by different rules but occupying the same physical space. Somewhere in those layers, Dr. Amelia Winters had become lost, or had deliberately gone where others couldn't follow. The writing appeared once more, DCD. Tietshelpe limai ted, my nti and crime TOOUORIGN OR trias IOPMTLY. The implication was clear. Reeves could either experience these alternate perceptions while remaining anchored in conventional reality, or he could attempt to fully transition as Winters had done. The latter carried obvious risks, including the possibility of being unable to return. As the chamber continued to transform around him, Reeves made his decision. From his pocket, he withdrew a length of nylon cord, securing one end to the chair, his anchor to conventional reality. The other end he tied around his waist. Physics might not work the same way across perceptual frameworks, but the symbolic connection might help maintain his orientation. I'm following Dr. Winters. How do I find her once I transition? FOLMURSONF Simlau Cullens CIOU SNES. While you are KINDLEAVs Tirasis. The walls of the chamber had now become almost completely transparent, the overlapping layers of reality visible as shifting, translucent spaces extending seemingly to infinity. Reeves focused on the layer that seemed most stable, a version of the chamber that glowed with a pale blue luminescence. Closing his eyes, he concentrated on Winters' description of the transition process, the necessary surrender of conventional perceptual frameworks. The vibration intensified, no longer just in his skull, but throughout his entire body, as if every cell were being recalibrated to a different frequency. When he opened his eyes again, everything had changed. He was still in the acoustic chamber, but not the one he had entered. This version had the same basic structure, but differed in countless small details. The walls pulsed with faint bioluminescence. The air carried a scent like ozone after lightning. Most noticeably, gravity felt slightly reduced, giving each movement an uncanny floating quality. The cord around his waist still stretched back to where the chair had been, but now disappeared into what looked like a rippling distortion in the air, presumably the aperture through which he had transitioned. His anchor to conventional reality remained intact, if tenuous. Reeves moved cautiously toward the chamber door, finding it unlocked. Beyond lay a version of the laboratory that was both familiar and profoundly altered. The basic layout matched the lab he knew, but the equipment was more organic in design, with flowing curves replacing angular structures. Screens displayed information using symbolic patterns rather than text or numbers. Most striking was the light. Everything was illuminated by the same pale blue glow that seemed to emanate from the materials themselves, rather than from any distinct source. Shadows behaved differently here, sometimes moving independently of the objects casting them. Reeves consulted his watch, discovering that it had stopped at the moment of transition. Time might flow differently in this perceptual framework, or perhaps conventional timepieces simply couldn't function here. Either way, he would need to monitor his cord carefully, his literal lifeline back to his origin reality. As he moved through the altered laboratory, he noticed faint traces on the floor, not footprints exactly, but disturbances in the ambient luminescence, as if someone had passed through recently. Following the resonance of similar consciousness, as the entity had suggested, he tracked these traces to the laboratory exit. The university beyond the lab doors was transformed in ways that defied easy description. The corridor stretched much longer than it should have, with doors appearing at impossible angles. The few windows showed an outside world of shifting geometries beneath a sky filled with slowly rotating patterns rather than clouds or stars. Yet for all its alienness, the environment wasn't completely incomprehensible. Reeves could still recognize the basic structure of the building, still navigate its transformed layout. This was still Ivy Heights University, just perceived through a radically different framework. The traces led him down the impossible corridor to a stairwell that spiraled downward far beyond what the building's actual dimensions should allow. As he descended, the environment became increasingly strange, walls occasionally transparent, revealing other layers of reality, like looking through sheets of rippling glass. Through these glimpses, he sometimes caught sight of the familiar university, people moving about completely unaware of the adjacent reality he now occupied. At the bottom of the endless stairwell, a doorway opened onto what should have been the building's lobby. Instead, Reeves found himself in a vast chamber that resembled a library or archive, with shelves stretching in all directions to distances that defied conventional spatial logic. Books and scrolls filled these shelves, along with objects that defied categorization, devices that changed shape when viewed from different angles, containers that seemed to hold volumes larger than themselves. And there, in the center of this impossible archive, stood Dr. Amelia Winters. She was examining something that resembled both a book and a machine, its pages flowing with symbols similar to those Reeves had seen in the chamber. She appeared physically unchanged except for her eyes, which now contained the same pale blue luminescence that pervaded this reality. She looked up as he approached, showing no surprise at his appearance. "Detective Reeves. They said someone was following my resonance trail." Her voice sounded normal despite the alien environment. "I assume the university hired you to find me." "Dga. Winters, you recognize me." Reeves kept his distance, uncertain of her mental state after days in this altered reality. "Of course, perception may have shifted, but memory remains intact." She gestured around them. "I imagine this is all quite disorienting for you. It was for me at first. The human mind struggles to process sensory information that doesn't conform to lifelong patterns. You disappeared 3 days ago. People are concerned." Winters laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the impossible space. 3 days. Interesting. Time flows differently here. For me, it's been much longer." She set down the object she'd been examining. "But yes, I suppose from an outside perspective, I did disappear rather abruptly. Your message about being lost in the echo chambers, was that meant as a warning or an invitation?" "Both." "Perhaps." Winters studied him with those luminous eyes. "I needed to leave a record of what happened, but I also knew someone would eventually attempt to follow, though I didn't expect it would be someone outside my research team. Why did you transition? What are you looking for here? Winters gestured to the vast archive surrounding them. Knowledge, detective. Perspective. Understanding beyond the artificial limitations of conventional perception. Her expression grew more intense. Do you realize what this place is? This is a repository of information beyond anything available in our reality, concepts and principles that can't even be properly perceived through standard human consciousness. Reeves noted the fervor in her voice, not the ranting of someone who had lost touch with reality, but the passion of a scientist who had found more than she ever expected. And the entities that exist here, the ones that communicated with me in the chamber. The resonance. That's what I call them, beings whose consciousness exists natively in this perceptual framework. Winters moved closer. They're not supernatural or alien in the conventional sense. They're just differently evolved. Consciousness that developed according to different perceptual rules. Are they responsible for your inability to return? Winter's expression shifted subtly. I never said I couldn't return, detective. I chose not to. At least not yet. She gestured toward the cord around his waist. You've maintained your anchor. Wise precaution. I severed mine intentionally after confirming transition was stable. The university's ethics committee was about to review your research, and Collins from DARPA was pressuring you for results. Convenient timing for a dimensional sabbatical. For the first time, Winters appeared troubled. Collins. Yes. He's precisely why I needed to accelerate my timeline. She moved to one of the strange windows in the archive, which showed glimpses of the conventional reality they had both left behind. I discovered DARPA's true interest in my research. They don't want to understand alternate perceptual frameworks. They want to weaponize them. That's what you argued about. The operational applications. Collins believes my technology could create the ultimate surveillance and infiltration system, operators who could transition between perceptual frameworks at will, observing or acting without being detectable by conventional means. Her voice hardened. Imagine soldiers who could step sideways into this reality, move undetected through conventional space, then transition back to assassinate targets or steal information. And the resonance. What's their interest in this cross-reality exchange? Curiosity, primarily. They've been aware of our reality for centuries, but had no way to communicate across the perceptual barrier until my technology created apertures. Winter's expression softened. They've been incredibly helpful, especially in helping me understand how to navigate this environment safely. Reeves considered everything he had seen and heard. Dr. Winters, whatever your reasons for coming here, people are looking for you. Collins knows about your final experiment. He provided me with your complete research files. Of course he did. He wants his asset recovered. Winters shook her head. Detective, I can't return yet. Not until I've secured this knowledge. The resonance have shown me how to create stable apertures between realities, apertures that can be opened and closed at will, without the limitations of my original technology. And you're concerned this knowledge would be dangerous in the wrong hands. it would be catastrophic, especially given what else exists in the spectrum of perception. Winters' luminous eyes fixed on him intently. The blue layer we're in now is just one of many adjacent realities. Some are less benign. The resonance maintain barriers between certain perceptual frameworks for good reason. Collins and his people would blindly breach them all in their quest for strategic advantage. So what's your plan? Stay here indefinitely? No. I need to complete my understanding of how to create controlled, secure apertures. Once I can do that, I can return with knowledge that can be properly safeguarded. She studied him. The question is, what do you intend to do now that you've found me? Reeves felt the slight tug of the cord around his waist, his connection to conventional reality. My job was to find you. I've done that. But I need to report something to those who hired me, and to Collins. Will you tell him what you found? That depends on what you can show me to verify your concerns. Winters considered this, then nodded toward one of the archive's flowing data repositories. Let me show you why I'm so cautious about this knowledge. She led him deeper into the archive, to a section where the ambient blue luminescence darkened to indigo. Here, the strange windows, looking out to other layers of reality, showed disturbing glimpses of environments that seemed actively hostile, spaces where physics operated in ways that would be immediately dangerous to human life. The perceptual spectrum includes frameworks that would be fundamentally incompatible with human consciousness and physiology. Winters indicated the shifting views. Some contain what you might call entities or energies that would perceive us as resources, intruders, or prey. And your technology could potentially open doorways to these environments as well. Any technology that can breach perceptual barriers carries this risk. The Resonants have developed methods to create selective apertures, ones that connect only to specific layers of the spectrum. Winters turned to face him fully. I can't allow this knowledge to become a tool for military application. Not until proper safeguards are established. Before Reeves could respond, a disturbance rippled through the archive. The blue luminescence flickered, and the strange windows showing other realities wavered like disturbed water. The resonance symbolic language appeared in the air around them, forming urgent patterns. What's happening? Reeves asked, noting Winters' sudden alarm. Someone's attempting to create an aperture from our original reality. A forced breach. Her voice was tight with concern. It's destabilizing this entire perceptual framework. Collins, most likely. He must have recovered enough of my research to attempt replication. Winters moved quickly to what appeared to be a control interface. This is exactly what I feared: brute force application without understanding the consequences. The disturbance intensified. Objects in the archive began to shift position, or phase in, and out of visibility. The cord around Reeves' waist pulled taut, vibrating with some unseen force. Detective, your anchor is becoming a liability. The forced aperture is locking onto connections between realities. Winters worked frantically at the interface. If Collins succeeds in creating a stable breach, he could potentially draw both of us back without proper transition protocols. Would that be so bad? It would get us home, at tremendous risk. Forced transition without proper perceptual recalibration could leave permanent neurological damage. In the worst case, consciousness could become untethered from physical form. Her luminous eyes met his. In simple terms, our minds might not fully return with our bodies. The archives trembled again, more violently. Through one of the windows, Reeves caught a glimpse of the university laboratory. Collins and several technicians surrounding a modified version of the echo chamber, equipment far more elaborate than what Winters had used. They're attempting to create a much larger aperture than anything I designed. Winters' voice was tight with concern. They don't understand the cascading effects across the perceptual spectrum. Symbols from the resonance flashed urgently around them. BEHCH ratus stability multi-IPLE from u ox affecti. Kote IM and rock you ready. Winters turned to Reeves, decision crystallizing in her expression. Detective, I need to return immediately to stop this before Collins creates a catastrophic breach. The resonance can help stabilize your anchor for safe transition, but I'll need to sever mine and create a new aperture directly into the laboratory. You're going to confront Collins and his team. I'm going to prevent them tearing holes in reality that we can't repair. She began rapidly manipulating the strange interface. The resonance will guide you back along your anchor line. Once there, find Chancellor Hargrove. Tell him code phrase Echo Protocol Omega. It will activate emergency containment procedures for the Cognitive Sciences building. Before Reeves could respond, Winters stepped away from the interface. The resonance symbols swirled around her, in complex patterns as her form began to shimmer with increasing luminescence. One more thing, Detective. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. What you've seen here, this knowledge changes people. How you use it will matter. With that cryptic statement, Dr. Amelia Winters disappeared in a flash of blue light, leaving Reeves alone in the increasingly unstable archive. The symbols of the resonance surrounded him now, forming patterns around the cord at his waist. FOLLOUBAUSVIEN. Transgine Windiobusilosigan. Danja INCRACNG. Reeves felt a powerful tug on the cord, not the gentle anchoring he had maintained, but an urgent pull toward his origin reality. Understanding that he had little choice, he grasped the cord with both hands and allowed it to guide him back through the impossible architecture of this perceptual framework. The journey back was far more chaotic than his transition in. The blue luminescence flickered and warped around him. Glimpses of other layers in the perceptual spectrum flashed by, some recognizable as variants of familiar reality, others so alien that his mind could barely process what he was seeing. The cord pulled him upward, through distorted versions of the university, past rippling barriers between realities, until he found himself back in the acoustic chamber, or something very like it. The walls still flexed and breathed unnaturally. The air still shimmered with visible patterns of energy. But the chamber was now filled with equipment that hadn't been there before, machinery designed to force open what Winters had accessed with more subtle means. Through the haze of transition, Reeves could see figures moving around him, Collins and his technicians, monitoring readings and adjusting parameters. They seemed unaware of his presence, as if he existed slightly out of phase with their reality. The cord around his waist pulled tighter, dragging him toward what appeared to be the original chair in the chamber, his anchor point. As he approached it, reality began to stabilize, the chamber's walls solidifying, the strange perceptions fading. With a sensation like breaking through the surface of water, Reeves fully transitioned back into conventional reality. The sudden shift sent him to his knees, his senses overwhelmed by the abrupt return to normal perception. Vital signs stabilizing, brain activity returning to baseline parameters. A technician's voice, clinical and detached. He's back. Full perceptual reintegration confirmed. Collins stood over him, his expression a mixture of surprise and calculation. Detective Reeves. Unexpected but fortuitous. Your presence confirms our approach is viable. Reeves struggled to his feet, his body feeling strangely heavy after the reduced gravity of the blue reality. Collins, you need to shut this down immediately. On the contrary, your successful return proves we're on the right track. Collins gestured to the elaborate equipment surrounding them. We've replicated Dr. Winters' technology and improved upon it. The aperture is nearly stable. The room shuddered, equipment readings spiking on multiple displays. One of the technicians called out in alarm. Sir, we're getting energy fluctuations across all monitored frequencies. The aperture is becoming less stable, not more. Increase power to the acoustic resonators. Widen the frequency band. Collins remained focused on Reeves. Where is Dr. Winters? Did you make contact? She's coming back to stop you. Reeves looked around frantically for a way to disable the equipment. Collins, you don't understand what you're tampering with. There are other layers beyond the one. I accessed dangerous ones. Precisely why this research is too important for academic oversight. Collins checked a monitor displaying complex waveforms. The perceptual spectrum represents the next frontier in national security. Whoever controls access to these alternate frameworks controls the future of intelligence and defense operations. Another, more violent tremor shook the laboratory. Warning alarms activated on several pieces of equipment. The air in the center of the chamber began to ripple visibly, like heat waves above hot asphalt, but with an unnatural blue tinge. Aperture destabilizing! Containment failing! A technician's voice was tight with panic. Maintain power levels. We're close to breakthrough. Collins remained unwavering despite the growing chaos around him. Reeves saw his opportunity as the technicians focused on their failing equipment. He lunged for what appeared to be the main power conduit, intending to disconnect it and shut down the entire system. Before he could reach it, the center of the chamber erupted in brilliant blue light. The rippling air tore open like fabric, revealing a swirling vortex of energy. From within this impossible aperture stepped Dr. Amelia Winters, her eyes still glowing with the luminescence of the other reality, her expression one of controlled fury. Collins! Shut it down now! Her voice carried an authority that froze everyone in the room. Your forced breach is destabilizing multiple perceptual frameworks. You've created an uncontrolled cascade. Collins recovered quickly from his shock. Dr. Winters, how convenient. Now we can continue your research properly, with adequate resources and oversight. You fool. Winters moved toward the control systems, her movements eerily fluid. This isn't research anymore. It's an impending catastrophe. As if to emphasize her point, the aperture behind her pulsed violently, expanding beyond its initial boundaries. Through its swirling center, Reeves caught glimpses of the blue reality he had visited, but also flashes of other, darker frameworks. In one such glimpse, something moved a shape that defied logical description, reaching toward the opening with appendages that seemed to bend reality around them. "Something's coming through," Reeves shouted, moving to Winters' side. She nodded grimly, her hands flying over the control systems. "The destabilization is creating bleed through from multiple frameworks, including ones the resonance keeps sealed for good reason." Collins finally seemed to grasp the severity of the situation as equipment began to fail catastrophically around them. "What are you doing?" "Initiating emergency containment." Winters locked eyes with Reeves. "Did you deliver my message to Hargrove?" "There wasn't time." "Then we do this manually." She turned to the technicians. "Everyone out! Now!" "This entire section needs to be evacuated." To Collins' visible frustration, his team didn't hesitate, abandoning their stations and rushing for the exit. As they fled, the aperture pulsed again, now large enough for a person to walk through without ducking. The shape Reeves had glimpsed moved closer to the opening, its presence causing visible distortions in the fabric of reality around it. "What is that thing?" Collins asked, his confident demeanor finally cracking. "Something that considers our reality a resource to be harvested." Winters worked frantically at the remaining functional controls. "Detective, there's an emergency protocol panel behind that access plate. Red switch under a safety cover." Reeves located the panel and exposed the switch as the laboratory continued to deteriorate around them. Winters' fingers flew across keyboards, her expression intensely focused despite the chaos. "Collins, last chance. Help us contain this or leave." She didn't look up from her work. For a moment, it seemed the DARPA operative would choose the latter. But as the entity in the aperture became more distinct, a writhing mass of geometries that hurt the eye to look upon directly, Collins moved to an adjacent control station. "What do you need?" "Reverse the polarity on the acoustic resonators. Create destructive interference with the breach frequencies." Winters glanced at Reeves. "When I give the word, throw that switch. It will initiate a localized EMP and seal this section of the building." Together, the three worked to contain the disaster they had collectively created. Winters directed their efforts with the authority of someone intimately familiar with both the technology and its dangers. As they worked, the entity from the dark framework continued its approach, now partially extending through the aperture into their reality, bringing with it sensations of wrongness that made Reeves' skin crawl and his thoughts scatter. "Now, detective!" Winters called suddenly. "Hit the switch!" Reeves slammed his palm against the red switch. Immediately, a high-pitched whine filled the laboratory, building quickly to a painful intensity. Winters grabbed both men by their arms, pulling them toward the exit. "Run. We have 10 seconds before the pulse." They sprinted from the laboratory just as the whine reached its peak. Behind them, the aperture contracted violently, the entity's protruding appendages severed as the dimensional tear began to close. A soundless flash of energy washed over them as they reached the corridor, knocking all three to the ground and plunging the building into darkness. In the emergency lighting that activated seconds later, Reeves looked back to see the laboratory sealed behind a heavy security door that had dropped automatically. Through its small reinforced window, he could see the aperture continuing to contract until it winked out of existence, leaving only smoking equipment and the faint scent of ozone. Winters sat up slowly, her eyes no longer glowing but retaining an unusual intensity. Containment successful. The breach is closed. She fixed Collins with a cold stare. No thanks to your reckless interference. Collins straightened his jacket, his composure returning now that immediate danger had passed. You disappeared with critical research, Dr. Winters. Research funded by my agency. What did you expect? I expected intelligence operatives to show actual intelligence. She stood, helping Reeves to his feet. You nearly created a catastrophic perceptual collapse because you couldn't wait for proper protocols to be established. Before Collins could respond, the corridor filled with university security personnel led by Kaplan, all looking appropriately alarmed. What the hell happened? Kaplan demanded. Half the building's systems are fried. Experimental equipment malfunction. Winters replied smoothly. Contained now. But the laboratory will need to remain sealed until proper decontamination procedures can be implemented. Kaplan looked skeptical but nodded. Chancellor Hargrove is on his way. He's going to want explanations from all of you. I look forward to providing them, Winters said with a pointed look at Collins. As security established a perimeter, Reeves found himself alone with Winters for a moment, while Collins argued with Kaplan about jurisdiction. You came back, Reeves observed quietly. I had to. What Collins was attempting would have created permanent tears in the perceptual barriers. The consequences would have been unimaginable. She looked tired but resolute. Besides, I learned what I needed to know. The resonance provided the knowledge. I sought how to create controlled, secure apertures that can be safely opened and closed. Will you share that knowledge? Carefully, selectively, with proper ethical frameworks in place. Winters smiled slightly. The University Ethics Committee will seem quite reasonable compared to what I experienced on the other side. And the military applications that concerned you. Still a danger, but one I'm better equipped to counter now. She glanced toward Collins. Knowledge like this can't be restricted to any single group or agency. It needs diverse oversight from scientific, ethical, and yes, security perspectives. Reeves considered everything he had experienced the impossible architecture of the blue reality. The resonance with their symbolic communication, the darker entity reaching through from a framework inimical to human life. It was knowledge that would never appear in his official report, but would forever change how he perceived the world around him. Dr. Winters, he said finally, what happens now? She looked at him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to have retained something of the other reality's perspective. Now, Detective Reeves, we each decide how to use what we've learned. The boundaries between perceptual frameworks have been part of human experience throughout history glimpsed by mystics, explored by scientists, exploited by those seeking power. She glanced toward the sealed laboratory, where reality itself had briefly torn open. The echo chambers exist all around us, places where perception shifts if we know how to listen. The question isn't whether these other frameworks exist, but how we choose to approach them. Chancellor Hargrove's voice echoed down the corridor as he arrived, demanding explanations. Collins was already crafting a narrative that would protect his agency's interests while salvaging what he could of the project. "I should go provide my version of events," Winters said with a wry smile. "Significantly edited for general consumption, of course." "Of course," Reeves agreed. "And the full version?" "That remains between those of us who have seen beyond conventional perception." She met his eyes one last time. "The boundaries exist for reasons, Detective. But so do the apertures." As Winters walked away to meet the Chancellor, Reeves found himself standing at his own threshold, between the investigator he had been and whatever he might become with the knowledge he now possessed. The echo chambers had changed him, as they had changed Winters. Reality itself seemed subtly different now, knowing what existed alongside it, just out of phase with normal perception. He reached into his pocket and found the small notebook Winters had used to record her frequency mappings, the key to controlled transitions between perceptual frameworks. He had never returned it after modifying the headset. Now it represented a door that could potentially be reopened. The choice of whether to use that key would be his alone. In the days that followed, the official explanation for events at Ivy Heights University described an equipment malfunction during experimental acoustic research. Dr. Amelia Winters resumed her position, though with significantly altered research parameters and a new ethics oversight committee that included representatives from multiple disciplines. Thomas Collins and his DARPA connections faded into the background, though Reeves occasionally noticed surveillance that suggested the agency's interest had not entirely disappeared. As for Morgan Reeves, he delivered a carefully edited report to Chancellor Hargrove, collecting his fee and officially closing the case of the missing professor. But the real case, the mystery of perception itself, remained open, a puzzle box with implications beyond anything in his previous experience. In his apartment above the old bookstore, Reeves added a final note to his private case file. Reality is not absolute but perceptual. The echo chambers exist in the spaces between conventional understanding. Some doors should remain closed. Others might need to be opened under the right circumstances. He closed the file and placed it in a drawer alongside Winters' notebook of frequency mappings, tools he might or might not use again, depending on what echoes called to him from the spaces between spaces. Outside his window, Boston continued its ordinary rhythms, its citizens moving through their consensus reality, unaware of the perceptual frameworks that existed alongside them, layers of existence separated by boundaries thinner than most would ever realize. Reeves could see them now, in moments of particular clarity, the faint blue luminescence at the edges of vision, the subtle ripples in air that might be apertures forming and closing naturally, the occasional sense of presences just beyond conventional perception. The echo chambers surrounded everyone. Most would never hear their call. But for those who did, those who found themselves at the threshold between perceptual frameworks, the choice would always be the same: to remain within the comfortable limitations of consensus reality, or to step beyond them into the vastness of what might be possible. Morgan Reeves had made his choice. And somewhere in a university laboratory, Dr. Amelia Winters was carefully, methodically, making hers, building bridges between worlds that most people would never know existed, yet might someday transform humanity's understanding of reality itself. The echoes continued, rippling through the spectrum of perception, waiting to be heard by those willing to listen.